The Gargoyles and the Lady of Notre Dame. Chapter 1, Un Tour with the Unknown. Rain was falling gently on the cobblestone streets of Paris when Jean arrived at the majestic Notre Dame Cathedral. The evening light bathed the imposing Gothic towers, creating a play of shadows that accentuated the shadowy characteristics of the gargoyles that watched from above. Jean, a photographer passionate about architecture, had been hired by a magazine to capture the essence of this iconic monument. Upon beginning his work, Jean was especially drawn to gargoyles. There was something about their frozen expressions that he found fascinating, a mix of the grotesque and the sublime. Throughout the day, he took numerous photographs from different angles, seeking to capture the essence of these stone guardians. Back at his studio in the quiet Montmartre district, Jean set about developing the photos. It was a process he always found relaxing, a meditation in the darkness as the images slowly emerged on the surface of the photographic paper. However, that night was different. While he was hanging the photos to dry, he noticed something strange in one of them, a translucent figure of a woman dressed in black, with a melancholic gaze that seemed to pass through the lens and look directly at him. Jean's heart skipped a beat. He re-examined the negative, convinced there must be some technical error, but the image was clear. The figure appeared in several photos, moving from one gargoyle to another, and in one, it was perfectly defined next to one of the sculptures, staring at it. Jean felt a chill run down his spine. He knew there was no one else in the place when he took the photos. He kept telling himself that there must be a logical explanation, a reflection of light, a play of shadows, anything. However, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had captured more than just architectural images. Despite his concern, he decided not to mention anything to the magazine or his colleagues. He feared that he would be called a fantasist or that his professionalism would be questioned. He put the photos in a drawer, determined to forget about it. But the woman's face continued to haunt him, especially at night, when the darkness of his room resonated with echoes of the inexplicable. The following weeks brought with them a series of inexplicable misfortunes. Health problems that left him bedridden, disagreements at work that he had never experienced before, and at home, objects that seemed to move on their own, as if an invisible presence had invaded his space. Jean was on the verge of despair, increasingly convinced that he had awakened something with those photographs. Finally, he decided that he should research more about the history of Notre Dame and its gargoyles. Perhaps there was a connection between what he had seen and the stories from the past. So, with renewed determination, he set out to unravel the mystery he had inadvertently captured with his camera. Chapter 2, Echoes of the Past. The days turned into weeks and Jean's restlessness did not cease. The photographs that he had developed in his dark room in Montmartre not only showed him an inexplicable image, but they left a mark on his mind, like a constant whisper that called him to investigate deeper. Determined to understand what he had captured in photographs of him, Jean began searching for him in France's National Library. His first steps took him to the historical archives of Notre Dame, where he hoped to find clues about the mysterious figure that appeared next to the gargoyles. The ancient documents told of many legends and folk tales, but there was one that caught his attention, the story of a woman of noble birth, Marguerite de la Croix, who lived in the 18th century. According to the chronicles, Marguerite was known for her extraordinary beauty and her unrequited love for a sculptor working on the restoration of the cathedral. Love between a noble woman and a commoner was unthinkable in those times, and Marguerite, consumed by sadness and despair, took her life in the high towers of Notre Dame, right between the gargoyles that her lover had sculpted. Since then, stories of a lady in black appearing in the shadows of the gargoyles had circulated among workers and visitors to the site, but were always dismissed as simple urban legends. Jean became increasingly convinced that the figure in his photographs was Marguerite. He began contacting local historians and clergy who knew the history of the cathedral, seeking answers. One of them, an elderly priest who had worked at Notre Dame for decades, told him that gargoyles were not only guardians of the church, but also, according to tradition, protectors against evil spirits. The priest shared with Jean that, in his years of service, he had heard multiple accounts from workers who claimed to have felt a presence or seen shadows moving among the gargoyles during the night. "Some souls are too disturbed to find rest," the priest told him with a look that revealed more than his words confessed. As he delved deeper into his research, Jean also began to experience disturbing dreams. In them, the figure of the lady in black approached, her lips moved as if she were trying to communicate something to him, but the sound never reached Jean. These dreams left him with a sense of urgency, an urge to find a way to help this tormented spirit. The feeling that he must do something to ease Marguerite's pain grew stronger and stronger. Jean knew that he had to return to Notre Dame, not only to face his own fears, but also to find the peace that seemed to elude them both. With this new purpose in mind, he began planning his return, determined to come face to face with the history he had unearthed. Chapter 3: The Lady in Black. With the discovery of Marguerite's story reverberating in his mind, Jean decided it was time for him to return to Notre Dame. He was not only looking for answers, but also an attempt at reconciliation with the disturbing past he had discovered. He knew that he had to confront the lady in black and unravel the mystery of her presence. One cloudy afternoon, Jean arrived at the cathedral again. The imposing structure stood like a silent giant, its gargoyles watching with stony expressions as Jean ascended the stairs leading to the towers. This time, he wasn't carrying his camera. Instead, in his hands he held a bouquet of white flowers, a symbol of peace and remembrance. He knew that he needed an offering to honor Marguerite's memory and, in some way, try to communicate her desire to help. Upon reaching the top of the cathedral, the wind blew gently between the gargoyles, creating a murmur that seemed to be filled with whispering voices. Jean approached the place where Marguerite had supposedly ended her life. He knelt and set the flowers down carefully, murmuring a silent prayer for the repose of her tormented soul. As he stood there, he felt a presence next to him. It wasn't tangible, but a sensation that enveloped him, like a gust of cold air that made his skin crawl. I wasn't alone. The lady in black, that spectral figure that he had seen in his photographs, seemed to be there with him, as if her gesture had awakened something within the old stones of the cathedral. Jean closed his eyes, trying to concentrate. In his mind, he saw flashes of images, Marguerite's face, the love he had felt, the pain and desperation that had led him to make the final decision of her life. And then the priest's words came to him, "Some souls are too disturbed to find rest." Suddenly, a shiver ran through his body and the shadows around him seemed to come to life, whispering fragments of forgotten stories to him. Jean understood that he must act as a mediator between the world of the living and the world of the dead. He took a deep breath, and with a firm voice, he spoke out loud, "Marguerite, if you are here, I want to help you. I am here to listen." The wind seemed to intensify, and a murmur rose among the gargoyles, as if Notre Dame itself responded to his words. At that moment, Jean felt a pressure on his shoulders, a soft, ethereal hand that seemed to guide him. In his mind, the images became more vivid and a feeling of sadness came over him, but also a strange peace, as if he had finally done the right thing. Jean stayed there until twilight began to give way to night, before slowly descending from the cathedral. As he walked away, he turned one last time to look up at the towers. For a moment, he thought he saw a dark figure watching him from above, but he felt no fear. Instead, a warm feeling of closure enveloped him. Despite not having all the answers, Jean felt that he had taken a crucial step toward unraveling the mystery and offering some peace to a tormented soul. He left with a promise to return, determined to continue his quest to free the Lady in Black from her eternal suffering. Chapter 4: The Enigma Revealed. After meeting him at the towers of Notre Dame, Jean was driven to discover more about Marguerite and the connection to the gargoyles. He returned to his apartment, where he began reviewing the notes and historical references he had gathered. As he progressed in his investigation, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, revealing a darker story than he had imagined. Jean decided to visit the municipal archives, searching for old records that could offer more details about Marguerite and the events of her time. There, among dusty documents and yellowed parchments, he discovered something surprising: Marguerite was not alone in her forbidden love. Other stories told of a group of young artists and architects who, along with the sculptor she loved, met secretly in the catacombs beneath the cathedral. These clandestine meetings were more than just meetings, they were rituals where art, poetry, and also, according to some rumors, alchemy and the esoteric were discussed. The connection between these encounters and the gargoyles began to become evident. According to chronicles, the sculptor, whose name had been carefully erased from most official records, had an obsession with Gothic legends and stone creatures. He was said to believe that gargoyles had the ability to protect the city's inhabitants, not only from the elements, but also from dark forces beyond human understanding. Jean found one account in particular that told of a fateful night in which Marguerite and the sculptor attempted a ritual to imbue the gargoyles with a protective energy. However, something went wrong. Marguerite disappeared that night, and the sculptor was found dead days later in an alley under mysterious circumstances. Convinced that Marguerite's spirit was trapped in the gargoyle plane due to that failed ritual, Jean began to formulate a plan to free her soul. He believed that if he could recreate the ritual and complete it correctly, Marguerite could finally find peace. That night, Jean returned to Notre Dame, carrying with him an ancient grimoire that he had found among the documents. The instructions were written in archaic Latin, but with his knowledge and a little intuition, Jean thought he could interpret what was necessary. Upon reaching the towers, he arranged a series of ritual objects, candles, incense, and an ancient crucifix that he had discovered among the sculptor's belongings. With the wind howling around the gargoyles and shadows dancing on the stone walls, Jean began the ritual. As he recited the words, a sense of presence intensified, and the gargoyles seemed to come to life, their shadows projecting like giants on the cathedral walls. Suddenly, a figure appeared before him, Marguerite, her face serene and sad, but her eyes filled with renewed hope. Jean felt the connection being made, a bridge between the past and the present. The final words of the ritual echoed in the air, and a soft light surrounded Marguerite, and she nodded gratefully before slowly fading away, leaving behind a whisper of peace. Jean stood there, on top of the cathedral, feeling the relief of a weight that had been lifted from his shoulders. He knew that he had helped Marguerite find the rest he so desperately needed, and that, in doing so, he had also freed part of her own soul. Chapter 5: Peace in the Shadows. The moonlight bathed the city of Paris as Jean descended from the towers of Notre Dame, with a mixture of relief and melancholy in his heart. The weight of mystery he had carried with him for so long seemed to dissipate along with the shadows that danced around the gargoyles. He knew that he had helped Marguerite find peace and, in doing so, had managed to close a chapter in his own life. The next day, Jean decided to make one last visit to the cathedral, not to face the unknown, but to say goodbye to a place that, despite its dark history, had offered him a unique opportunity for reconciliation. As he approached the entrance, he noticed a change in the atmosphere. The cathedral seemed brighter, more welcoming. Upon entering, he was greeted by the echo of morning chants and the warm glow of candles on the altar. Jean headed towards the stairs that led to the towers, feeling that each step was a farewell to a disturbing past that he had managed to understand and face. Upon reaching the top, he stopped in front of the gargoyles that had been silent witnesses of his journey. With a slight smile, he realized that he no longer felt the same fear or trepidation as he did before. The stone creatures seemed more like guardians than threats, and Jean realized that he had found in them a symbol of protection and wisdom. As he looked at the city spread out before him, Jean thought of Marguerite and the sculptor, of her love and her tragic fate. In his heart, he felt that he had finally honored her memory the way they deserved. The priest's words echoed in his mind: some mysteries are never fully resolved, but finding peace is a type of resolution in itself. With one last look at the gargoyles, Jean descended the stairs, leaving the cathedral and its secrets behind. He knew that the experience had changed his perspective on life, strengthening his belief in the intangible and the spiritual. Although he did not fully understand the forces he had unleashed and faced, he had learned to accept that life was full of inexplicable and mysterious things. Jean returned to her daily routine, but with a new appreciation for the small wonders in life. He reconnected with his love of photography, capturing not only images, but also stories and emotions through his lens. With each click of the shutter, he honored not only Marguerite, but all souls who, like her, sought her place in the world. In the days that followed, Jean avoided Notre Dame, not out of fear, but out of respect. However, from time to time, he would pass by the cathedral on his walks around the city. Each time he did so, he would look up at the towers and smile, remembering that even in the deepest shadows, the light of peace and understanding could shine. The story of Marguerite and the gargoyles became part of the folklore of his own life, a personal legend he told to those who were open to listening. And so, while the gargoyles continued to watch over the city from above, Jean lived with the certainty that he had done the right thing, knowing that his own story, like Marguerite's, had found its happy ending.